Have you ever wondered what the Book of Proverbs really is? Not just the short quotes or popular verses, but the full story behind it? Most people only scratch the surface. But what if I told you there's a deeper, richer message hidden in its structure, its origin, and even in the man who wrote most of it? Today, we're going to explore Proverbs like never before. Stick with me, because what you're about to hear will change the way you read the Bible forever. To understand Proverbs, we first have to understand its author, King Solomon. The son of David and Bathsheba, Solomon was known for one thing above all: wisdom. But this wisdom wasn't earned or inherited. It was a divine gift. In 1 Kings 3, God appears to Solomon in a dream and says, "Ask what I shall give you." Solomon doesn't ask for power, money, or victory in battle. Instead, he asks for wisdom to govern the people. God is so pleased with this request that he grants him not only wisdom, but also wealth and honor beyond any king of his time. That's where Proverbs begins, at the intersection of divine wisdom and royal responsibility. The Proverbs isn't just a list of moral sayings. It's a spiritual architecture. Chapters 1 through 9 are a kind of introduction, written in poetic and often emotional language. It's here that Solomon introduces two women, Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. These symbolic characters represent two paths in life. One leads to life, the other to death. The book is calling you, yes, you to make a decision. This is not a neutral collection of tips. It's a call to action. Here is something most people miss. Proverbs was designed to be read by young men preparing for leadership, likely princes. That's why you'll often see the phrase, "my son," repeated throughout. This isn't accidental. The book is intentionally framed as a kind of royal manual, a curriculum for kings in training. It's not random advice. It's kingdom strategy. And if you're watching this, you can tap into that wisdom too. And let's not forget, while Solomon is credited with most of the book, he isn't the only contributor. In fact, chapters 30 and 31 are written by Agur and King Lemuel. Agur's sayings are deeply philosophical, wrestling with the mystery of God and human ignorance. Lemuel's section, which includes the famous Proverbs 31 woman, is actually advice passed down to him by his mother. So this book, while often seen as masculine, actually contains some of the most powerful feminine voices in Scripture. One of the most compelling features of Proverbs is its structure. While modern readers might feel it's a scattered collection of sayings, biblical scholars have discovered a deliberate organization. The first 9 chapters are a unified discourse wisdom poetry with a clear father-to-son tone. But starting in chapter 10, we see the classic two-line Proverbs. These are often parallel or contrasting lines that deliver a punchy truth. For example, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. These lines are crafted for memorization, meant to be meditated on, repeated, and internalized. What makes Proverbs timeless is how universally its principles apply. Whether you're religious or not, ideas like honesty, humility, diligence, and restraint resonate across cultures. But Proverbs isn't just about ethics. It is about aligning your life with God's design. This is what the Hebrew term chokmah, usually translated as wisdom, really means. It's not just intelligence or cleverness. It's skillful living. In Exodus, the same word is used to describe artisans building the tabernacle. In Proverbs, it's used to describe a life crafted with the same intentional excellence. And here's something that gets overlooked in most studies: the fear of the Lord. This phrase, repeated throughout the book, is foundational. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. But what does it mean? It's not terror. It's not superstition. It's reverent awe. It's the realization that God is God, and you are not. Without this posture, Proverbs says, all your wisdom is ultimately flawed. You might be successful, but you won't be right. You might win in business, but lose in character. This is the central thread that holds the book together. Interestingly, Proverbs doesn't shy away from the dark sides of life either. Laziness, adultery, pride, violence, and dishonesty are all dealt with bluntly. Solomon warns repeatedly about the consequences of sleeping with another man's wife, or partnering with violent men, or chasing after wealth unjustly. These aren't just moral rules, they're warnings. And they often come with vivid imagery, like a man being led to slaughter or a bird caught in a trap. These word pictures were meant to haunt the listener into making wise choices. Now here is where it gets deeply practical. Proverbs shows us that wisdom isn't only for the big moments of life. It's for how you speak, how you handle money, how you treat your neighbor, how you manage anger. It drills into the everyday, the mundane. This isn't philosophy in the clouds. It's divine direction for how to live on Monday morning. And this is what makes Proverbs a spiritual survival guide in a chaotic world. Let's talk about speech. Proverbs has more to say about your mouth than almost any other topic. Why? Because words create worlds. Proverbs 18:21 says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue." That's not poetic exaggeration. It's a spiritual reality. Words can heal or destroy, build trust or ignite conflict. Think about how many relationships have ended over a careless word. Proverbs calls us to be slow to speak, quick to listen, and intentional with our language. Gossip, lying, and flattery are all condemned, not just because they're wrong, but because they corrupt the soul. Now think about money. Proverbs is filled with financial wisdom that transcends time. It warns against debt, laziness, and dishonesty, while praising hard work, generosity, and contentment. One striking proverb says, "Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it." That's ancient advice on compound interest. In a world obsessed with quick riches, Proverbs teaches us that sustainable wealth is built through patience, discipline, and ethical behavior. It's a blueprint for financial peace. But Proverbs doesn't just talk about doing the right things. It talks about being the right kind of person. The book repeatedly highlights integrity, humility, and teachability. In fact, one of the signs of a wise person is their willingness to accept correction. "Rebuke a wise man, and he will love you," says Proverbs 9-8. That's revolutionary. In today's culture of defensiveness and pride, Proverbs teaches that true strength is shown through humility and growth. And what about relationships? Proverbs speaks directly to how we treat others, especially the vulnerable. It says, "Whoever mocks the poor insults his maker, and speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves." That's not just ancient morality, that's social justice rooted in theology. Proverbs calls us to be generous, just, and compassionate, especially to the weak and voiceless. It reminds us that how we treat others is ultimately how we treat God. There's also a subtle but powerful theme throughout Proverbs: self-control. Whether it's anger, lust, pride, or spending, Proverbs insists that wisdom begins with mastering yourself. A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. That verse hits different in the age of distraction and impulsivity. Proverbs isn't offering ancient platitudes. It is holding up a mirror to our daily struggles and offering divine help to overcome them. One of the most poetic and mysterious parts of Proverbs is the concept of Lady Wisdom. Introduced in chapter 1 and expanded in chapters 8 and 9, she's more than a metaphor. She's a voice calling out in the streets, urging people to choose life and truth. In Proverbs 8, she says, "The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his work, before his deeds of old." Many theologians see this as a foreshadowing of Christ, the pre-existent Logos, the Word through whom all things were made. In fact, early church fathers like Augustine and Justin Martyr believed that Lady Wisdom symbolized the eternal Christ, calling humanity to righteousness. But for every Lady Wisdom, there's Lady Folly. Proverbs 9 paints a chilling picture of her: loud, seductive, and deceitful. She lures people in with promises of pleasure and freedom, but her house is described as the way to Sheol, the realm of the dead. The message is clear. Wisdom and foolishness are not just personality types, they are spiritual pathways. One leads to life and flourishing, the other to destruction. The Book of Proverbs is not just advising you how to live well, it's warning you how not to die a fool. And that's why Proverbs is more than ancient advice. It's spiritual warfare. Each decision you make, each word you speak, and each attitude you carry is part of a larger battle between wisdom and folly, life and death, righteousness and evil. Proverbs calls the reader to choose again and again who they will become. And it warns that the longer you walk the path of folly, the harder it becomes to return. That's why the book urges us to get wisdom, though it cost all you have. Wisdom isn't cheap, but it's worth everything. It is also worth noting that Proverbs doesn't promise a perfect life if you follow its teachings. It's filled with general truths, not guarantees. For example, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old he will not depart from it, is not a divine formula, it's a pattern. Proverbs observes how life usually works under God's order, but it acknowledges that injustice and unpredictability exist. That's why we need the whole Bible, not just Proverbs, to understand God's ways. That nuance is crucial for keeping our faith grounded and real. Finally, we come to Proverbs 31, the iconic chapter about the virtuous woman. This passage has often been misunderstood or reduced to domestic stereotypes, but a closer look reveals something powerful. The woman in Proverbs 31 is entrepreneurial, strong, wise, generous, and respected. She's a businesswoman, a leader, and a nurturer. And remember, these words were taught to King Lemuel by his mother. Proverbs 31 is not just a description of an ideal woman. It is a model of what wisdom looks like when it is lived out in everyday life, through faithfulness, courage, and purpose. To fully appreciate Proverbs, we have to see it as part of a greater biblical trilogy. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. These three books make up what scholars call the wisdom literature of the Old Testament. Proverbs shows us the ideal, that if you live wisely and follow God's principles, life tends to go well. But Ecclesiastes adds a dose of realism, showing us that sometimes life is unpredictable, unfair, and even meaningless without God. Then comes Job, the story of a righteous man who suffers despite doing everything right. Together, these books give us a balanced view of wisdom, hope, humility, and a deeper trust in God. This matters because it prevents us from turning Proverbs into a prosperity formula. The book is filled with if-then statements, but they are not promises. They are patterns. This is why some people follow biblical wisdom, yet still face hardship. Proverbs was never meant to replace faith with formulas. Instead, it invites us to pursue a life aligned with God's truth because it is right, not just because it works. It's wisdom for the long game, not a shortcut to blessings. Let's also talk about how Proverbs speaks to leadership. The book often addresses kings, rulers, and people in authority. It is not for kings, O Lemuel, to drink wine, or for rulers to crave beer, says Proverbs 31-4, warning about the dangers of clouded judgment. By justice, a king gives a country stability, but those who are greedy for bribes tear it down. These verses remind us that leadership is a sacred responsibility and that wisdom is essential not just for personal success, but for the well-being of entire communities. This connection between wisdom and justice is deeply embedded in Hebrew culture. The Hebrew word for wisdom, wokma, is also tied to ethics, character, and social responsibility. It's not just about knowing the right thing, it's about doing it. That's why Proverbs has such a strong emphasis on fairness in business, caring for the poor, and speaking truth even when it's costly. In a world where self-interest often rules, Proverbs presents a countercultural vision. a life of integrity, service, and righteousness. And here's something that might surprise you. Jesus himself taught in the style of Proverbs. Many of his sayings, especially in the Sermon on the Mount, mirror the structure and themes of this wisdom book. Phrases like, "Blessed are the meek," or "You cannot serve both God and money," or "Do not cast your pearls before swine," carry the same punch and poetic rhythm. Jesus wasn't just a teacher of wisdom, he embodied it. In fact, 1 Corinthians 1:24 calls Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. To know Jesus is to know the deepest fulfillment of what Proverbs is pointing toward. As we approach the end of our journey through Proverbs, one truth becomes unavoidable. Wisdom is not automatic. It requires pursuit. It requires discipline. Proverbs 2 says, "If you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, then you will understand the fear of the Lord." That's the heartbeat of the book. It's not about being perfect, but about being intentional. Wisdom is available, but only to those who seek it like silver, who search for it like hidden treasure. In a distracted world, Proverbs dares us to become seekers. But seeking wisdom isn't just about reading the book, it's about applying it. Proverbs warns us repeatedly that fools hate correction, ignore advice, and walk straight into ruin. The wise, on the other hand, listen. They reflect. They change course when necessary. Proverbs doesn't just challenge how you act. It reshapes how you think, how you plan, how you speak, and how you treat others. It's not just a tool for success, it's a mirror for the soul. One of the most beautiful things about Proverbs is that it honors the process of growth. It knows that wisdom isn't achieved overnight. That's why so many verses are aimed at the young, at the beginning of their journey. But it also speaks to the old, the experienced, the leaders and rulers. There's no point in life where wisdom becomes irrelevant. And that means it's never too late to start. Whether you're 18 or 80, Proverbs has something fresh to teach you. So where do you start? Begin with the fear of the Lord. Cultivate awe, humility, and reverence before God. Then take one proverb a day, not just to read, but to live. Ask yourself, how does this apply to my relationships, my work, my choices? And don't just read it alone. Proverbs was written for community. Share it with your family, your friends, your kids. Pass it on, because the wisdom of God was never meant to be hoarded. It was meant to multiply. In the end, Proverbs is more than a book. It's a divine invitation. An invitation to live differently, to rise above the noise, to walk a path of righteousness, clarity, peace, and purpose. In a world obsessed with shortcuts, Proverbs calls us to depth. In a world that honors image, it teaches us to value character. And in a culture drowning in information, it shows us the beauty of wisdom, God's way, God's voice, God's truth. Don't just read Proverbs, live it. Because when you live by wisdom, you don't just survive, you flourish.